Hello, beautiful, lightful souls. Well, I am so happy and excited to be here with Rob Gentile today. And he wrote a beautiful book called Quarks of Light, which recently came out. He had two near-death experiences that we're going to talk about today. And his story overall is just fascinating and really deep in so many ways. So I'm going to ask Rob to simply lead me to that first near-death experience. And you were religious, right? Before that first near-death experience?
Tricia, yes, thank you for having me. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. I was raised Catholic, but I got lost along the way and didn't practice my faith as much as I would have liked to for a lot of reasons. It's a very complex road that I went down with my daughter with special needs and so on and so forth. But yes, raised in a Catholic home, and I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I live outside of Charlotte, North Carolina now. So I'll get right to it. What led to my first near-death experience is that on January 26th, 2016, I had a massive heart attack completely out of nowhere. What precipitated this is that 4 days prior, I had some minor surgery on my neck from sports injuries when I was younger. And I actually went to Pittsburgh, back to my hometown, to see a very famous Korean doctor there who goes in through the front of the neck to drill out the bone spurs instead of cutting the back of your neck open. And it was just a one-day surgery. You're in the hospital for 1 day. But when I came home, the theory is now that I probably threw a blood clot or something, but I had a massive heart attack in my bed at around 11 p.m. And my wife was very confused, had no idea what was going on because we have one child who has special needs. She usually has seizures in the night. So my wife jumped out of bed and ran down to her room and realized that the screaming was coming from our bedroom. And I was flopping around like a fish and remember none of this. She called the ambulance. The hospital was only about 3 miles from my house here. So they rushed me to the hospital. When I got to the hospital, they gave me some medicines, blood thinners, so on and so forth to stabilize me. They knew I was having a massive heart attack, but didn't know, how far the thing would go. They thought they had me under control. I'm relatively unconscious. My wife is in the room with me. There's a nurse there. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I sprang forward on the gurney as if someone had grabbed me by my lapels and pulled me forward with great force. And my eyes popped wide open and I screamed out the nickname of my brother-in-law, Frosty, who had committed suicide 7 weeks prior, unfortunately. So I screamed out Frosty's name and then all of a sudden just collapsed backward onto the gurney. I flatlined. Code blue rang out throughout the hospital, and in rushed a team of doctors that began to work on me. They could not resuscitate me. I was technically dead, flatlined for 20 minutes. They continued to work on me. The cardiologist was not in the hospital, so he was en route. When the cardiologist arrived, they were able to maintain a very, very, very slight pulse there towards the end. And he went in through my leg, fished a pump up into my heart, and inserted 2 stents into my widowmaker. And unfortunately, there was already deep damage done to my heart. I went into cardiogenic shock. I was intubated, and I slipped into a 4-day coma. So that's how it began.
And when you came out of that coma, were you different for knowing that Frosty continued on and had met you? And how did that change your worldview? I'm assuming there's a lot to that story. Tell me as much as you want. I know those who've seen your interviews want to know about Frosty and how it changed you.
Great question. Yes. So what happened is that I never woke up from the time that I started flailing around in my bed, screaming in pain, until I woke up from my 4-day coma. I don't remember any of that. But as soon as I woke up out of my 4-day coma, my wife was the first one that came into my room. And she retells the story that I was very weak. but when she came to my bedside, I was talking to her like a child in this high-pitched voice and talking really fast. And I said, Melanie, you have to believe me. You have to believe me. Your brother came to me. And she looked stunned, and she looked at me, and she said, now it makes sense. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, right before you flatlined, when you were still unconscious, you sprang forward on the gurney in what looked like a scene out of the movie The Exorcist. And this spooked all of us. And you screamed out his name, and you collapsed backward onto the gurney. And then you flatlined, and I was screaming, don't go to Frosty, don't go to Frosty.
Oh, no. She was like, don't go there.
Yeah, don't go there, don't go there. Because as you know, that a lot of times someone from the other side greets you and helps you make that transition. So she thought that's what was happening. So she was panicked, and they had to take her out of the room as the doctors came in to start to work on me.
And it must have changed your worldview to see him in particular, because he had died of, was it overdose or suicide, or?
It was suicide, yes. And what was curious about that is that his mother had called me the night that he had committed suicide. At the time, he was living in the upstairs bedroom of his parents' house. And he had taken an unknown street drug. He had been clean for like 5 years, and it was around Christmas time, and you know how emotional that can be. And there were a lot of things going on in his life with a divorce and his losing his business and all these kind of things. And, you know, he went out, just fell off the wagon and got a hold of something that was just made him crazy in the moment. And he took his own life. So his mother had called me to go up to his bedroom and sift through a rather gruesome scene to try and find a journal with some of his notes in it, because he did journal from time to time to try to give them some kind of explanation as to why he would have done that. And I went up into that room 7 times until I finally found a journal, which I gave to the family.
Well, he was probably grateful to you. Like, I'm getting that sense as a spirit, you know, there was a sense of gratitude.
I think so. And what happened when I came out of coma, and after my wife got over the shock, because she knew then that I did have an encounter with his spirit, she said, tell me exactly what Frosty said to you. And he said, I made a big mess out of things, and you have to go back and help clean things up. But tell my family I'm in a good place.
Oh.
And when he said that to me, it really changed my own thinking, that paradigm of how I was raised as a Catholic. You know, as a Catholic, suicide was a mortal sin. There was no pass, no go. You were going straight to hell. And, you know, then I started to question some of these assumptions that I had made about God and the Creator. And I don't think a loving God would condemn anyone for a very complicated act like that, particularly when they're not in their right mind. So that began to, you know, Frosty it prepared me for my next really profound near-death experience. He prepared me spiritually.
Yeah, and there is so much to your story. You know, many times I've pushed people to get right to the near-death experience, and yours is so beautiful. Your second one is just like, there's so many lessons that can be unpacked from that. But your physical journey is intense too, Rob. So there's a lot to your story. So yeah, describe what you went through to get to that second near-death experience, because it's a lot.
Yeah, it was tremendous journey because when I woke up, I was told my heart, of course, was completely destroyed. And the only way I was going to survive was to get a heart transplant. So that began my quest in the book, I have a chapter entitled Seeking a New Heart. So that began the quest to find a heart. And this is where I learned about all the dirty little secrets of organ transplant and how scarce organs really are. And I searched for a very long time, a lot of different facilities who, not turned me down, but told me that the chances of you getting a heart were, slim and none. Most people don't get a heart. So that whole journey and what had happened and how I eventually ended up in Chicago was kind of like a Hollywood moment story. But I have to tell you, Tricia, to keep me alive, before I was released from the hospital, what they did is that they inserted a port in my chest that dripped a particular medicine called milrinone onto my heart, like every 30 to 60 seconds. So I had this battery pack strapped over my left shoulder that powered this pump that dripped the heart on medicine on my heart. And the doctors call it like STP for the heart, because what it does is that it makes the heart beat stronger and faster, but it also starts the clock ticking and it wears the heart out very quickly. So I had that, and then they also strapped me in what's called a defibrillator vest, which kind of looks like a bulletproof vest that a policeman would wear. So every time I would have an episode of the heart failing, this thing would shock you back to life.
Wow.
So that's enough to give you.
I have to ask too, because I think in some ways the near-death experience is fortunate because we have a little less fear of death. I can't imagine someone going through all that you went through without some kind of knowledge of that, but I'm sure people do, go through intense things and they don't have that connection to the leg. Like, did you face your mortality several times and go, okay, I may die, like this may be it, in this journey? Or did you just stay in this place of peace around the whole thing?
Well, that's a good question, because the real peace didn't come to me then. The struggle to trying to muscle through this whole thing, because you're on all these drugs, these blood thinners, all of these things that are trying to keep you alive, and you realize that the heart, it's the engine for the body. So your lungs start to fail. I mean, everything starts to fail. Kidneys, So you're on all this medicine to try to keep you alive, and you're swimming upstream the whole time. And every day you just don't know what's going to happen to you next. But because of Frosty, I did have a bit of a sense that, hey, if I do pass, I think I'm going to be okay. I wasn't sure, but I knew for sure now after meeting Frosty in that place that I was going to be okay and I was going to live on in spirit. So like I say, I think that Frosty helped lay the groundwork for what was yet to come. And it gave me the strength to push through and continue my fight to try to get a heart. Because I have a special needs child, my only child, my daughter Maria, is total care. She has a very rare disorder called Rett syndrome. It only strikes girls typically. And I wanted to stay around for her to be able to help her, of course. So that put a little more fire in my belly to keep going, to keep researching, and try to make the best of it.
Yeah, so lead us to that second near-death experience, because it is a profound one.
Sure. So to kind of cut to the chase and get through all of this, so I died that night, January 26, 2016. And then when I couldn't get a heart here in North Carolina, Florida, I contacted a lot of different transplant facilities, but my body was just about to give out at any time. I mean, I was just like the walking dead. I was about to resign from my job. I'm a sales engineer for a steel company. And I called my boss. My company's based in Chicago. And I told him that I was going to have to resign. I needed a heart transplant. I wouldn't be coming back to work. And he said, well, just before you do that, let me talk to the owner of the company. And I said, okay, well, whatever good that's going to do. So I didn't realize that the owner of my company is a philanthropist and that he is on the medical board at the University of Chicago Medicine. So I got a call from him, and he said, look, you're going to get a call from a transplant doctor at the University of Chicago, and just listen to what this guy has to say and let me know what you want to do. So this gentleman called me and he said, Rob, if you come here, if you don't have any other disease state, we'll transplant you within 3 to 4 months. So 2 days later, my wife and I were on a plane. I got to Chicago, and when the transplant team saw me there, they said, we have no idea how you're even walking around, but you're here and we'll get you stable and we'll figure out how to keep you alive until a donor heart arrives. So it was, you could say luck, coincidence, whatever it is, but they had been working on an experimental heart pump that I didn't know about that was about the size of a lunchbox. And this doctor approached me and he said, look, I've been working on this thing for a number of years, and this thing is about this big, and I won't have to open up your chest. We just fish a little balloon down through the aorta and your heart, and these wires will come out the side of your body through a titanium tube and attach to this little pump, and you can carry it around and you can walk and try to stay as healthy as you can until your heart comes. I said, oh, doc, that's brilliant. I mean, I said, how many people have had this thing? And he said, well, that's it. Other than cows, we really haven't tested it on anyone. I said, oh, like where steaks come from?
Oh my goodness, wow.
And he said, well, we've tested it on a few pigs. And I said, oh, how comforting, you know.
Yeah,
but
I guess the only comfort is they're bigger than us. So if we can work on them, then, you know, it works.
Right. So it was curious, but he said, you know, we did have it in one other human being for like 48 hours, and because he was going to die and his heart showed up, but we need 3 weeks of data to get it to the human trial stage. And I said, well, if this thing works, how many people can it help? And he said, not only will it work, but we're gonna change the history of cardiac care together. And I said, where do I sign? And it did. So I had it in actually for exactly 3 weeks. But Tricia, what's remarkable about this is that the heart pump and the medicine dripping on me and everything could not sustain me. So I got to a point where I'm about 174 pounds. I got down to about 138. I was a skeleton. And one night, my body just got to the place where there were some other health issues too. I don't want to give everything away so the readers can enjoy the book. But one night in my room, I just got to the point where I couldn't fight anymore, and I just resigned myself. I screamed out in the middle of the night, "Do with me what you will." And it was in that moment that I had my second and most profound near-death experience.
Do you remember just being detached immediately? Like what happened when you transitioned?
Well, when I transitioned, it was, and no one knows, of course, how long you're in that place. But
No.
what happened to me was
Timelessness. It's hard to say what that is.
well, and what is that place, right? I'm still trying to figure this out, even after it took me 3 years to write the book, and that chapter, Into the Ethereal, is the shortest chapter in the book because there's no language for these things. So
I know. Like I
right?
started writing that part in 2008 and just held those chapters for years before I wrote my book. And it's challenging because other writers will look at it who haven't had these experiences and they're like, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? So you have to keep drilling it down and figuring out how to translate these concepts that are felt and understood into actual language. And some of it isn't translatable. It's just felt. And so I always feel like you and other near-death experiencers, like we're brothers and sisters in this. It's like we've been there and we know that we've experienced something, and then we try our best to communicate it. But yeah, so what happened?
Good point. Yes, and you are probably too, and a lot of I'm new at this, so I haven't talked to a lot of other near-death experiences, but I could tell you that some of them I have now, because I've done a couple of podcasts, I've heard some of their stories. There are a lot of similarities there, but everybody seems to have, a different experience. But for me, when I resigned myself, I was immediately taken to a place where, and the best way for me to describe this, the way I describe it in the book, is that it's kind of like looking out an airplane window on a clear day. You can see everything, but you really don't see anything at all. I mean, you see this blue mass in front of you, you see what we think is sky, but you really don't see anything. And that's what happened to me. I was taken up, and I remember looking down at my broken, atrophied body with the heart pump and all the IVs and everything trying to keep me alive, and in my green hospital gown, and yet I can see myself standing in the middle of nowhere, with my green hospital gown. None of this stuff is attached. And I looked well, I looked whole. Uh,
That experience of feeling whole, how did that change you? Was it the way I look at it as like, oh, that's the eternal part of myself, or that's my soul, or how did you think of yourself as well and whole? What was your
that,
thought?
that's precisely how I saw myself, is that, wow, this is who I really am. This thing down here that I'm walking around in is, just this shell that, keeps me in the temporal world. But where I'm really from and who I really am is this spiritual being. And what happened then is that, well, the first thing that happened was quite curious, because I was given a life review of some of the nurses that I had made negative assumptions about. And that was a fascinating piece of my experience, because we all do this, we all judge, whether we want to admit it or not. And some of these nurses that I judged, I was able to see their life in a regression of events, which was very curious. So it was like watching this trailer into a movie, and everything is going backwards. But what was interesting is that anytime something happened that was either a violent, experience for them, or some bad personal choices or circumstances out of their control, it helped contribute to who they were. And when that life review was done, and I started to think about it in that place, I was like, it painted a picture of who they were and why they were who they were. And I said to myself, how can I have ever judged those people so harshly?
Do you think that we all love each other more than we realize? Like that's part of what we see. We're like, oh, everyone's struggling and we're doing our best a lot of times, and we just get this little perspective of someone's life and judge them. But once we see the whole picture, I didn't have a review quite like that, but I felt like most people are good, at the core. And that's what's beautiful, is like most of us are trying.
I believe that 100%. And I talk about one of the doctors, that actually the cardiologist that came into the room, and he's the one that found the blockage in my widowmaker. And I went and interviewed him a year later, and we talked about all these things. And he's a Sikh, and that's what the Sikhs believe, that we're all born innately good. And I believe that. I believe that we're all born with that light in us. And the vicissitudes of life, or whatever our life circumstances are, either brighten that light or dim that light while we're here and we have this experience as a human being. So yeah, I agree with you. And
so when you saw that's what the light, or that's what the consciousness chose to show you about yourself at that moment, to improve you, in a sense. Like, I think that's what life reviews often are, is like an improvement in our vision.
Definitely, because what happened next was I had my own life review.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And same thing. I mean, and I was shown the things that in my own mind that I'm most shameful about, and the mistakes that I've made in my life. And I said to myself, how could I have ever judged myself so harshly? When I looked at it holistically, and the things that brought me to that point, because, let's face it, we all try to make the best decisions that we can in our lives with the information we have at the moment. This whole experience is to grow and evolve, but we don't always have that information when we're in that place and we have to make these decisions.
I know. And the things that we often judge ourselves about are not necessarily what we need to be worried about. It's are we harming other people? Are we adding to their lives in a good way? Like that seemed to be a message that came up. I don't know what your overall message seemed to be, but the things we judge ourselves about, like, and I've actually never talked about this in an interview, but I attempted suicide before my near-death experience. And so I had this moment where I did this, and when I saw this in my life review, it was as if God was like, don't even worry about it. That was the darkness. That was your mind taking you somewhere you didn't need to go. and it's just not something you need to think about anymore. You need to turn to the light. In everything, it was turn to the light for healing, turn to the light for your own healing, and remind others too.
I love the way you put that, because it is all about the darkness and the light. That's really what it's all about when it comes down to it. Moving towards that irreproachable light, which I believe is God's love, the love and light that comes from the Creator, or, you know, remaining stuck and moving into the darkness. And that's what I think that I learned the most about these mistakes that all of us human beings make while we're here. You know, it's the darkness and the vicissitudes of life, just like, you know, Frosty and many others. We get off track, whether it's through a drug addiction or a bad set of circumstances, and we get drug into the darkness. And, you know, we have a responsibility to try to pull ourselves back into the light and recognize who we really are, because that's who we really are. It's not the darkness.
Yeah, so you were shown that, and was it an extensive review? Did you like just quickly scan your life, or did the light stop in different places?
It stopped in different places, and it, you know, like I say, it stopped when these bad choices came, or circumstances out of your control, or some of these things happened to us, bad personal choices, things like that. And, you know, it kept on just moving through it quickly. And it kind of like at high speed, because in that place, by the way, you're able to assimilate information very quickly, and things happen very quickly. And in this kind of this telepathic synchronicity kind of way, it's hard to explain how it happens. You're able to absorb a massive amount of information without even thinking about it.
Yeah, and the part that confused me is, in talking about it later, I was like, well, how do you know something? It's just almost implanted in you. Like, it's just given to you, and you know that this is right in that moment. You know, like, this is what you're receiving. And that's so hard to explain here, because we use language as this way of transmitting things. But language is imprinted in the brain too, but it's just like, you know, instant.
Well, that's part of what I experienced as I was in that place and saw other dimensions, and this knowledge was, you know, becoming more available to me and downloaded. I remember in that place that all I had to do was observe, and any question I had was already answered. It's like that knowledge is there, and we don't even have to think about it.
So what happened next after your life review? And it is kind of like a sequence of events, but it's interesting, isn't it, how they just flow together?
It was, yes, it was a sequence, but in the way that you can kind of articulate this, the only way you can articulate this is to try to break it down, because it seems to happen all at once when you're there. And then when you come back, all these details begin to fade immediately. And the only way you can try to figure this thing out in your head to articulate it is to try to put it in this kind of sequence that you mentioned, which is a really good way of putting it. So what happened next was, which is an incredible thing, I saw and became part of this interactive web made of twinkling lights that seemed to stretch into infinity. And the only way that I can explain this is that it looked like this gigantic interactive web was made of neurons. And we all from science class know what a neuron looks like. It has a nucleus, and then it has these tentacles, and they all kind of weave together. And this beautiful tapestry of twinkling lights just seemed to stretch into infinity and hang on the ceiling of the universe. And in that place, I came to understand that each one of those nucleuses had a spark of light. And the title of the book is called Quarks of Light, because when I came back, and for the next year, I began to research what was going on in that experience, and I came to understand that quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter, and they're made of light. And I thought to myself, wow, what an interesting thing, because when I was there, I understood that the Creator made it really simple and probably uses the same recipe for everything, because quarks, and there are a variety of quarks, but these quarks combine and they create infinite possibilities in the universe. They combine to create a human being, a plant, a dog, and they're all made of light. And I believe that we are all made of light. We come from the light. So
that actually helps me understand part of my near-death experience, because I was told to remind them that they are lights, like remind them to turn on their lights, and it seemed like we can turn it on or off, like it's real simple or something. And I was like, I think it's more complex than that, but that was the message. But thank you for explaining that specifically.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. So in that place, I understood that, and this is part of my experience that I was disappointed in, and I have to share this with you because, so being raised Catholic, being raised a Christian, I wondered why in that space I did not see a divine being. I did not see Jesus Christ. I did not see God. Instead, God was impressed as concepts that I wholly understood in that moment. Concepts like, I am omnipotent. I am the power behind all things. This is your real identity. This is divine source. Loneliness is an illusion. And I didn't understand why loneliness was an illusion until I came back and I thought about this beautiful interactive web made of lights that, since we're all connected, loneliness really is an illusion. I mean, that's a hard concept to understand because there are so many lonely people in the world, but when they realize that they're part of this beautiful fabric, this tapestry that's woven together, and that we're all part of it, it puts things in a different perspective.
Oh, thank you for saying that as well, because that was, I think, part of the reason why people get to a place of wanting to commit suicide too. They feel alone. And part of my message was just walk outside and know you're connected to the tree, know you're connected to the stars, know you're connected to your neighbor, know that there's so many people you can talk to that you're not even thinking about, who you are connected to and actually do care. If one doesn't care, keep searching, you'll find someone who does.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. I mean, I talk about in the book so many times that nature has whispered its secrets, through me and my wife to help my daughter. Nature is a wonderful place to get out into. And unfortunately, with the advent of social media and all this other stuff, we seem to have become isolated from nature and don't go out and get our, knees dirty in the grass anymore and roll around in the mud like, we did when we were kids, unfortunately, because that connects us,
Yeah. So that loneliness is a big topic recently in the news, and I think NPR did a segment on it. And how, if someone is lonely and watching this, that a lot of times the questions people give to me are, well, I don't know who to love. I don't know how to volunteer. I don't know how to get involved. How am I supposed to care for this world? And what do you tell people who are deeply lonely and, don't know how to connect?
Oh, I think what you said is a real simple and perfect way to get out there. I mean, here where I live, it's a suburb, but I'm very close to the country, and there are multiple ways. I mean, every community, big or small, has either a church or a Rotary Club or a YMCA or a Red Cross, or there are so many ways that we can get out there and connect. I one of the things that I do, I try to walk every other morning. And one of the things that I try to do is carry a little bag with me, and I put a glove on, and I pick up trash along the way, because I think it's everybody's responsibility to do that. And it's kind of funny. Some of my neighbors have picked up on that, and they were curious about why I was doing that and what I was doing. And before you know it, I've got 3-4 people walking with me in the mornings.
Aww.
And so you can do that if you don't feel comfortable getting into an organization or volunteering somewhere. Go out and start it yourself.
I love that. Yeah, being vulnerable in a way and just being yourself and authentic sometimes connects you to people. Beautiful. Well, I didn't mean to sidetrack from your near-death experience, because there's a part that I just absolutely love that comes next, because it's unusual. You You saw your daughter's spirit over there, is that correct?
I did. I did, yes. Very emotional part of my experience. And that was really a watershed event for me, Tricia, because my daughter, Maria, is, she's nonverbal, she doesn't walk, talk, feed herself. And my wife and I, she's 24 now, and for the past 20 years, we've taken her everywhere to try to find a cure, pretty much risked it all. And in that place, I was able to communicate with Maria. But my experience in that place is that we really don't have a conversation, an audible conversation like we're having now. In that place, it's almost as if communication and thoughts are telepathic and synchronized. Those thoughts just come, and you can communicate with somebody at the speed of light, and you can hear them in your spirit. But when I saw Maria standing there, she was perfect and whole and beautiful, and she had this light coming through her. And I understood in that place that it wasn't an ordinary light. It was that spiritual light that animates all life. And it comes from the Creator. And in that place, I asked her, I said, Maria, I don't know what to do for you anymore when you're having seizures and when you're in pain and when you're suffering. Tell me what to do. And she stared back at me and she said, just love me. And that was it. 3 magic words, just love me. And when she said that, I heard my own voice echo back to me, because I said, I never want to leave this place. And that voice echoed back to me. And when I heard myself say that, I was back in my hospital bed with the heart pumping me and all the IVs coming out of my body. And that was the end of that experience.
Wow. And did she look about the same age, or was it just she was just full of light? And
Yes, I mean, so Rett syndrome girls have this characteristic of they writhe their hands like this nonstop. They can't stop doing it, something in the brain. And she was just standing there, perfect, with her hands by her side, just like any other child would, with this beautiful, luminous look on her face and this spiritual light coming through her. That was just, it's very difficult to explain, but it's a light that I've seen before, even in the temporal world with her, because she's the one that proved to me that God exists, ironically. And when she said that, it was so profound for me.
I imagine so. I imagine that, and that's an unusual part of a near-death experience, because most of the time people see people who've transitioned, like you saw Frosty, but to see the essence of your daughter over there, her soul, that's fascinating. There was, the only thing I can connect to that is, I've heard that people connect with people in a coma, or people who are about to transition, or people while they're sleeping, so there seems to be this realm of understanding where we can cross into people and understand them at a deeper level. And that's such a beautiful gift.
It really was. And to me, that was the perfect way to say it. It was a beautiful gift that now, sustains me to continue to, understand Maria more. We've always had this beautiful spiritual connection. She communicates to me with her eyes and through a lot of other ways. But now that I know that she is whole in spirit and she's fine, even though it doesn't help us when we see others that we love suffer. Suffering is real. I mean, I'm not going to be Pollyanna about that. We all suffer. But we have to understand that in spirit, we're perfectly whole, and that's really who we are.
Exactly. So I have a question from a viewer. You received a heart transplant eventually, and do you feel that maybe you have some connection to that heart that you were given? Do you feel like something, there's been studies of sometimes people develop a new love for ice cream because the person who had the heart loved ice cream, or, like there's real differences. Have you gone through any of that, and what happened when you received the transplant?
Yeah, how much of this I want to give away, I don't know. So they'll enjoy the book, but the short answer is yes.
Oh, cool.
Yes, I did. And, it's curious because my taste in music changed.
Wow. No, okay, I really am curious. How did your taste in music change?
Because this person is very young.
Oh, well, that's great. So you're hipper. You're like listening to hip hop.
I'm a rocker again, man. I can dig it. So my taste in foods, and it's kind of interesting because, and I did a lot of research on this, and it's in the book, and I really questioned a lot of my transplant team about it. And the doctor that transplanted me, Dr. Juvanandan, he's an Indian gentleman, beautiful human being. He's transplanted over 1,500 people. And he tells me, he said, Rob, science has found a way to do this, but we really don't know what we're doing spiritually.
Wow.
And
wow.
It is proven science that, of course, the heart is the first thing that develops in the womb. And that heart is what communicates to the brain first. We forget about this from science class, but the heart communicates with the brain. And in that space, what happens is that the heart actually develops its own brain, and it stores a lot of the information about us there, about our personal preferences, about the things that, music, food, all of these things. And it takes about 1 year to 2 years. And for some heart transplant patients, it never expresses, and no one knows why that is. Maybe some of us souls are more open to it expressing. One never knows. But it takes a while. And for me personally, it took that long before this person started to express in me.
Wow, that is fascinating. It's also fascinating because you're probably more sensitive after a near-death experience to the whole experience of having someone's heart and being more deeply connected to that life and how it continues to live through you. And wow.
Very much so. I'm almost to the point of being an empath. I could feel other people's pain, very sensitive that way. I think I'm natured that way anyway, particularly having dealt with my daughter all these years, but now it's like super sensitive. So I'm very acutely aware of it.
Interesting. Well, thank you for answering that question. Another viewer wants to know that love that we feel over there, that love and safety, which near-death experiencers often describe as home. And the minute we say, I just want to stay here, we get thrown back. Like, what do you think that is? And does religion help us get there? Like people are asking this. This is not my question, but people want to know, what is this love? Is religion part of it or not part of it, or what does it matter?
Do you mean, is religion part of it, are you saying?
Yeah, that's what this viewer wants to know.
Well, this could be really sticky, this whole subject of religion. I typically don't like to go there, because what I realized was when I was in that place, I was not my body, my race, or my religion. I was part of the whole. I was part of God's love and light. I've come to understand that God, love, and light are one. And for me, in my personal experience, because I had a pretty rough go of it, particularly when Maria was in some of her rapid deterioration phases. I had a pretty rough relationship with God, and pretty much gave up on my religion, going to church and things like that. And for me, I realized that it really wasn't about going to church anyway. And not that I'm saying going to church is bad, because I think that if wherever you get fed by that love and light, I think is right. But for me, it's more about a relationship than it is any kind of religion, because there's a chapter in the book where I address this called All One. And I wrote that chapter because along my journey, I was saved, for example, the night I died, I was saved by a Sikh, a Christian, and a Hindu.
I love that.
And
it took them all to
yeah,
bring
right.
this experience together.
And I'm still friends with them now, particularly after the book. I call them the Holy Trinity, kind of, because they saved my life that night. But along the way, I had a Jewish doctor, a Muslim doctor. I had all these people with all these worldviews, and I researched each one of them to find that common thread, Tricia, throughout all of the religious beliefs. And that common thread is love. And that's the universal language that God speaks. The universal language that our Creator speaks is love. And love and light are one and part of it. I really believe that God uses light to create, heal, and transform us. And, whether or not it ends up being quirks or whatever it is, I mean, these mysteries are being unfolded every single day. We're discovering new galaxies. We're discovering, loop bonds and all these crazy stuff that's out there, what Einstein called spooky science. So we're discovering all these things every day. But I will never give up on this concept that God is love and light. I can tell you that.
I agree. And when we near-death experiencers get together, you're reminding me of moments where I've interviewed others, and we come down to that moment where different people, Chris Batts was one interview, and he tried to commit suicide. God told him to go spread the news that God is love. And so we're just like yelling at the interview, God is love, it's all love, it's all light, and we get so far out there, that, but that's truly the mission. Like, you boil it down, is love and light. That's the mission.
That's it. And I'm glad you brought this suicide thing up again, because I've had a lot of people contact me. I was really blessed with the book became a #1 bestseller in 13 different categories, including the psychology of suicide. And the message that I want to convey about that is that when I was part of this interactive web and I was connected to everything, while I was in that place, I knew that if I loved, the light would spread. But if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. It's an important message. It was a message of unity and oneness, because we have to realize, and this is where this whole illusion of loneliness comes in, we're all connected. When we hurt one another, we hurt everything connected to us. And it's a concept that I want to write more about. I want to talk more about, because I think that when we really understand that concept, I think that's when we'll find peace within ourselves and peace within our world. Until then, if we keep seeing each other as separate, then there's very little chance for the peace that we all hope for.
Yeah, it's such an important concept that can be drilled down. And, I try to do it with humor sometimes too. I saw this meme, and it was the universe. And it's like, some people are going to be really shocked to find out they're not the center of this, and I think, though, if you boil down, what is self-love and what is narcissism, and, these concepts like this, I think self-love is just knowing we're worthy of a flow of constant unconditional love from God. Like, I'm worthy of it, you're worthy of it, every person on this planet is worthy of that flow of unconditional love in their lives at all times, no matter what. And most of psychology can be boiled down to just love yourself through it, and you will heal along the way. As you love yourself through a moment of transition or a difficult moment, you're not putting pain on others, you're loving yourself through it and releasing it. And I think narcissism is this belief that I'm in so much pain, this gives me the right to harm others.
No, you're spot on with that. Absolutely. There's a big difference, to carry that thought a little further, between self-love, which is really loving the Creator and loving yourself, and then, narcissism or, egotism and all of these things. I've come to understand that ego stands for edges God out. And when we get that, and I think that's why I had this beautiful experience, because when I resigned myself, and once you can demolish the ego and get the ego out of the way, you realize that it's not about you.
Yeah, it's about how your story, it has already helped so many people and will continue to help so many people feel
Yeah.
peace, feel healing, feel connection, have deeper understanding. My story, your story, all these stories, all of us from so many different walks of life are saying similar things, and it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the importance of of sharing these things and spreading that light. And I feel a responsibility to do it. As a matter of fact, that's why. And I have, it's a very complicated life. I'm a transplant. I have a special needs child. I mean, I'm still getting up in the middle of the night changing diapers. But I got to tell you that I was so driven to get this thing done. It took me 3 years because I only wrote from 4:30 in the morning to 7:30 in the morning before I went to work every day. But I was driven to get it done because I really believe that Spirit said, you need to tell your story before you leave this place because it's important.
You just made me realize something. Like, I sometimes say that the writer's journey is a lonely journey, but it wasn't. I felt assisted by the other side at times, and I'm sure you felt assisted too. It's like, even though it is lonely, you're sitting at this computer by yourself, like, can't be disturbed, it's hard, but there is assistance, there's help.
Well, I want to talk about that for a second because I think it's really important to understand this, because I believe that all knowledge, creativity, everything comes from the spiritual side. How can it not? We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I've read about and listened to a lot of famous musicians, athletes, everyone talk about that. I love what Paul Simon said, the singer-songwriter. When he writes a song, he sits down and he says, I wait for the show to start. So I did that every morning. I showed up at the same place. Some people call it muse, some people call it spirit. I call it the Holy Spirit. And I said a little prayer and I waited for those words to come through me and not from me. But you have to show up and do the work.
And that's something that I want to put out there into the world too, that sometimes words, whether it's written, whether it's spoken, these can be healing. Words can be healing as they hit the airwaves and as they move out into the world. I've seen people kind of freak out at times about big stages or having to tell their story. I'm like, no, never freak out about the biggest possible stage, because even if you help one person who's in ICU and they hear your story and it makes their transition beautiful, it was worth it. It was worth it to help that one person.
Totally worth it. Probably one of the most gratifying things that has happened to me since I wrote this book was I got an email about three weeks ago or so from a woman who was going through a very difficult time, lost a couple of children. And she wrote to me and she said, I just finished your book and it pulled me back from committing suicide. And when I tell you, it brought me to tears, because when I thought about leaving 4 children alone in the world without a mother, and you losing such a beautiful soul filled with light, it made it all worthwhile. I mean, I'd sit down and do it again if it took me 3 years, if I could save one more person.
I know. And what's fascinating to me, and the more I interview people like you and, connect with others, the more something Howard Storm said that it really sinks in. God said that, we need to come back here, near-death experiencers, to Howard Storm and spread this light. And Howard Storm was angry about it. And he's like, there's not enough of us. And he's like, there's billions of people. And God said, yeah, but there's millions of you. And millions of you will touch hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions at times, and it spreads. And those people connect with other people, like the long-term effect. We don't even know probably till our next life review. I think of 25 years of teaching, and if you empower one person to live a really good life, that affects their kids and their kids. Yes. And it spreads.
Yes. Yeah. And it makes it all worthwhile. It only takes one. It's got to start with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're called in that way to spread light. And that term light worker, it just makes sense on some level after a while. It's like, I guess that's what this is. Love worker and light worker.
Yeah, right.
Oh, but
Join the
so
team.
one last question for you, and you can talk as little or as much as you want about this, but near-death experiencers are different. They have these after effects and they are different. And I'm sure your wife must be incredibly supportive, but, like, tell me, how do you feel different and how do people perceive you differently? What do you think are your biggest after effects and how is this like changing your life?
Well, I can tell you, yeah, my wife has been very supportive. I mean, I couldn't have written the book without her help, supporting me through this. And as you know, being a writer, sometimes you get very frustrated and you get moody and you can't, you're trying to knock your head, trying to get the words to come out. And, it's a difficult process, but that has been a wonderful part of this experience, having her support me through it. The other thing was the most gratifying part when it comes to my own personal family life is to finally see Maria for who she is. Maria, these special needs children, to me, I've come to understand that they are the pure essence of God's love and light, because they come into the world with no ulterior motives. They don't understand hate. They don't understand judgment. There's not an ulterior bone in their body, motive in their body. They're just beautiful, pure beings here to teach us. And it was Maria that really taught me how to be human. It was Maria, working with Maria and cleansing her one morning in the tub, where I cried out to God, "Where are you?" And it was placed on my spirit that, "Look at me, I'm right here." And when that happened, I broke down and I realized that God lives within each one of us. That's where God experiences and expresses life through us.
I'm so glad you gave the example of her, because you remind me of this moment in time where I was teaching 8th grade and I had a special needs student who would come in every day and hand me a flower and a love note. She was pure love, and she would hug everyone and she just spread love wherever she went. And I saw 4 different girls bullying her. And one of these girls was a Miss Teen USA, another one was a cheerleader, and I was like floored. And so I asked the principal if I could have these 4 girls for an entire month and keep them in my room at lunch and just talk with them. And that was their punishment, is they didn't get to go socialize for an entire month. We had to chat and we had to get deep with one another and really talk about how unfair and what they were missing. Like I was like, I saw beauty in that special needs girl way more than the Miss Teen USA, and I think our culture misses that a lot of times. But my whole point was like to get inside those girls and show them what truth and what beauty is in a different way.
Wow, Trish, I love the way you put that, because, I can write another book on that whole subject of authenticity and the real meaning of beauty, because it has nothing to do with what we perceive it to be. I think we've all been trained to, who defines beauty? Who defines, what it is that how we should look each day? And, we've been programmed to these things, right? But that true beauty of God's love and light that comes through these kids, like you say, is the real beauty. The rest of it's folly, honestly. And if we get that message and we put these things in perspective, I think it really helps us be better human beings. And that's really what it's all about,
Yeah, well, maybe you will write another book about Maria and that experience. I think that could help a lot of people too, or at least, a talk just on that subject, because I know there's a lot of people who know this truth that you're talking about, who are raising special needs kids. So I know it touches a lot of people who have your experience.
Well, our youth needs to hear it too, because once they understand that their real identity comes from God, and that's where their value comes from, then I think that it'll help them adjust, because the peer pressure today, and well, you know, as a teacher, because of social media, because of the internet, because of all these things that are out there, I'll tell you, it's tough. It's tough on these kids.
Oh my God, I was sitting with these at a dinner recently with these beautiful teenagers, and they took 50 pictures of themselves, and man, they analyzed every little piece of hair and everything. And I was like, oh my God, you're as good looking as you'll ever be. Just post a picture, like just, but they have to try 50 different filters, and there was so much self-analysis. I'm like, wow, you're really missing out on just enjoying this night sky above us and this
Right,
moment.
right. Yeah, and that's what it does. You know what it does? It destroys the imagination.
Yeah.
And it turns them into, these zombies and that's the darkness to me. That's where the darkness starts to come in. When they start to lose their own identity and authenticity, then, they start to turn into this kind of homogenized group of people that you can't even recognize, because they're not expressing their own gifts that they came here to express. That was, a part of my experience, that I understood that we come here with a purpose and with a gift, and nobody else has it. And that's your real light that needs to shine through and come through while you're here. Because goodness sakes, I mean, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to come back. So I want to make sure that I express it all while I'm here.
I used to, like my experience happened so long ago and I was young. I used to make a joke where I was like, ooh, this situation is tempting me to have one more life here, knowing that I was going to act badly enough to have to come back.
Yeah, right.
But no, ultimately, I don't want to. I want to spread enough goodness to not do another earth tour.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
feel like I've done a lot of them. Like I was bored, I'm kind of old,
Right.
like
No,
not
I hear
again.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. So
But these experiences, Tricia, to answer that question fully, it makes me such a better human being, and to realize that I have no right to judge anyone, to realize that we all come into this world with this love and light inside us, and we all have the responsibility to become who we were created to be and spread as much of that light as we can while we're here. And, I've come to understand that we can control our actions, and we have a responsibility to do so, and let God control the outcome, because we don't really control anything except our own actions. And that's enough.
yeah, that is, and that's what people tend to review is their actions, and that's a good ending for everyone. So thank you so much for your beautiful book and for the talks that you do. And I know you'll continue to give more talks and reach more people. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you,
I
Rob.
did too. Thank you for having me, Tricia. It's been a joy.
And if you want to check out the links for Rob's book, I'll post that below. And also his website. And I'd love to stay in touch with you as well. My spiritual community is meeting on the 31st of this month. We meet twice a month, and that's just a great way to really connect with people, meditate together, and I do a few live readings. But if you enjoyed this interview, please do subscribe and like and check out some of Rob's other interviews as well. But thank you, everyone. May you be blessed.